The economic fallout from the COVID-19 pandemic has really devastated New York City. And currently, the budget is under review. And we have with us today City Councilwoman Helen Rosenthal, who covers the 6th District in Manhattan, which is the Upper West Side, and she's on the committee. And we want to just sort of touch base with her and see where everything stands today. Helen, how are you? Good to see you.
Oh, it's great to see you, Victoria. We're all Zooming, trying to get our work done. And then, of course, now with the death of the killing of George Floyd,
Yeah.
we're in an uproar about that, rightly so. And I'm excited, frankly, to talk with you about the city's budget because I think it's an opportunity to make a statement about addressing underlying racial disparity at the same time as passing the city's budget. But we can get into that.
Yeah, so let's just take it from the beginning for people who don't really understand. So the state budget was passed in April, right? And now the city has to come up with a budget, and we're facing a deficit, right? Can you talk to us about that and what that means, really?
Sure, it's unprecedented and not surprising. So with the city having been shut down since mid-March, the entire economy of the city, of the state, of the country has fallen to pieces. And there's been a tremendous revenue drop in the city's budget. So going into this situation, the city had about $94 billion budget to cover all of our costs, police, fire, sanitation, human services, homeless shelters, schools, all of those things. And when COVID hit, we watched our revenues just plummet. And so much so that they're down by over a tenth of the budget. We're with a $93 billion budget going into this, we've lost nearly $10 billion in revenues. So that's a devastating hit. And by the end of June, the city is required by law to have a balanced budget, show that the expenses equal revenues for the following year. And it's such a challenge to get there. You can't cut $10 billion worth of programs from the city's budget. So I'm a member of the city's budget negotiating team, and we meet on a regular basis looking at the large picture to see what's going on and to think about how to put together a package of solutions, because there's no one silver bullet. You can't just cut $10 billion out of the city's budget. So the mayor proposed an initial idea of how to close the budget gap that included some draconian cuts that the city council's just not willing to abide, including cutting all the summer youth employment programs for our children. Well, particularly now, it makes no sense to do that. We want to make sure our young people, can be gainfully employed this summer, can be doing things that would lift up themselves, their family, and their community. And the opportunity to do that is through the Summer Youth Employment Program. So anyway, that was one of his cuts. I come at this from having worked at the city's Office of Management and Budget for 7 years, a couple decades ago, and know that we need to find a lot of different pieces, put together a lot of different pieces. So one piece is we use up some of our reserves. One piece is we do make some cuts. There's always opportunity for more productivity in the city's budget. Let's push harder to find more productivity savings. And particularly under this climate, we may be making choices about cutting some agencies. I would include the NYPD in that, because I think particularly now when crime is at an all-time low, when, you know, prior to George Floyd even, you know, the police were building up community relations, doing a better or worse job depending on the neighborhood, but they simply don't need as many officers because crime has dropped so precipitously over the last, frankly, 8 years, right, of this administration. But it dropped because of reforms to policing. So they've done such a good job, they don't need as much funding, and that's a good thing.
And even like just like right now, if we're talking about today and the last 7 days in New York City with the protests and we've seen some looting, and there's been a huge increase in the number of police. That would be the argument that we wouldn't have that reserve of officers. Is that sort of the counter argument to that?
Not, I don't find it particularly compelling. I think as we've sorted through the facts in the last few days, what we found is that the looters are not equivalent to the peaceful, nonviolent people who are walking in the street saying, here are concerns about systemic racism, systemic, you can even look at the outcome of COVID, where a whole race of people have died at a higher rate compared to white people. And you start to peel back the onion to understand why that's true. Systemic racism, but also what's the impact of systemic racism? It means poorer health outcomes, you know, a wider wealth divide. And all of these things add up to a worse health response for when a virus attacks your body. All sorts of reasons. We haven't even figured out all the pieces yet, but there are facts. And the facts are that Black and brown people have died at a higher rate than white people, especially in New York City. Right. So now we have this opportunity of passing a budget, an opportunity, a requirement that we pass this city budget. What are we going to do? I think what we do is not turn to the usual ways of solving things, which is cutting programs. You know, people have to remember that going into this pandemic, the last time the city went to the market to issue bonds, their bond rating improved. They're the AA1. So better than Bloomberg. I mean, this is the best bond rating the city has had in a very long time. Why? Because the market believes the city pre-COVID will continue to bring in revenues to meet its expenses. And so borrowing to build more infrastructure or improve our infrastructure is solid, right? That's what was happening pre-COVID. So with COVID, with no fault of the city, not because of the city's expenditures, revenues dropped. So what we really need is a revenue solution to get us to the place or tide us over until our revenues come back, until the city and the country can get through this pandemic and this economic pandemic as well. So what we have to do is, in order not to cut the very important social service programs that everyone always turns to say that, oh, that liberal spending, we spent too much money. No. All of that spending has helped people and has helped lift people up. We need to continue that spending. Cutting it now would only widen the divide. And I can give examples about it, but here's the point, is that there is low-hanging fruit to raise revenue that the state would have to allow the city and the state to do. And that is this tax from 1905 called the Securities Transfer Tax. It was put in place in 1905, accepted as something that helped to produce revenue, actually shared equally between the state and the city. And it was simply pennies on the dollar for every time a stock or a bond was bought and sold. That's all, pennies on the dollar. Happens to add up to a lot of money. Why? Because a lot of people do trades. That's all. A lot of people do trades. What has been the one institution that has done well under COVID?
Besides Amazon?
Wall Street.
Right.
Wall Street.
Wall Street.
Stocks and bonds have been trading heavily. The markets have been going up and down. Who's benefited? Brokerage houses. Brokers, brokerage houses. That's who's benefited from COVID-19. And what this would do, this idea would simply bring back the tax on those trades. So the tax was put in place in 1905. It was unwound in the early 1980s when a banker convinced a governor to put in an automatic rebate of those taxes back to the brokerage houses. Now's the time to end the rebate. Just end it. End it.
So it would be ending something. It wouldn't even be implementing something. Is that what I'm under?
Law that is on the books. That's exactly right, Victoria. This law is on the books. And all we would be doing is unwinding the rebate and simply allowing the revenue to come in equally split between the city and the state coffers. And I'm not even dictating how the money should be spent. I'm just saying it's revenue. This is a revenue problem. It needs a revenue solution.
Right.
And unwinding this tax, you could unwind half the tax and still be bringing in billions of dollars for the city and for the state. And frankly, the tax is a securities tax. I could talk about this for hours, and I know we're on a time deadline, but so far we've only applied it to stocks. We should be applying it to bonds. And frankly, we should be applying it to derivatives, all of which is allowed under this 1905 security transfer tax. And guess who supported this idea in his presidential run? Not only Andrew Yang and Bernie Sanders, Michael Bloomberg. Michael Bloomberg agreed that we should do this at a federal level. So we need this tax. Now's the time to allow the tax to go through and to allow the city and the state to use that revenue to simply make up from the revenue shortfall of what's happening because of something that is out of all of our control.
Right.
It's not because of excessive spending. It's not because the city mismanaged its budget. It's because COVID happened and we lost all our revenue.
And so if I could just ask, so we're saying the city was in a better state of a fiscal state before COVID than it was even under Bloomberg, right? Yep. And we have this event that occurs that we have no control over. And three solutions that I'm seeing, if I remember correctly, that de Blasio is, that the mayor is suggesting is the cuts to service, cuts to the programs, and furloughing workers. And you're suggesting something that's more revenue building. Am I encapsulating that correctly?
Okay, so you should be the person talking about this all the time. That's exactly it. It's revenue building. I mean, my goodness, the last thing we should be doing is a freeze to wages, furloughing our employees. I mean, this is a stable, we're the largest employer in the city. 375,000 people, that's a stable job for all those people. Why would we want to unhinge that? That's the last.
What's the pushback? What's the pushback?
Well,
I mean, I think I know the answer.
Great question, but no, it's a great question. There are two problems. One is that this is a state decision. The city can't do this on its own. The state has to, we need the legislature to pass bills, the state and the assembly to pass bills, and we need the governor to sign that bill. So that's a hurdle. That's a real hurdle. The reason I think we shouldn't be afraid, though, of that hurdle is because of the elegance of this solution. The governor has said he doesn't want to tax the wealthy as a solution. No one's taxing the wealthy in this idea. This is not taxing the wealthy. And frankly, I think Rebney should get behind it as well.
What does it look like on if I make a trade? What does that look like for, you know, pennies?
Penny, at the most 5 cents. It would mean we don't have to furlough. It would mean we don't have wage cuts. Means that we don't cut important social service programs like getting our homeless off the street, like feeding people, like taking care of our seniors in the senior centers, like our entire Health and Hospitals Corporation, which is a mostly publicly funded hospital system. It means doing all the COVID contact tracing, all the good public health work that we have to do. It means continuing to clean up our streets. It means continuing to pave our streets.
How much money would it bring in, do you think, if you could estimate?
At the most, for the city and also for the state, it brings in $13 billion.
Billion.
$13 billion at the most. 13 billion for the city. Our gap is 10.
It sounds like a solution to me. How do I help? How do anybody watching, how can they help?
Anyone watching, call your legislators, call your state elected officials and talk about unwinding the rebate for the security transfer tax. It feels like a double negative, so it's a little confusing, but you can say, all you need to say is, I'm calling on you to pass legislation to support a security transfer tax. Thank you for asking that question, because that is literally all we need to do. And I think the unions could get behind it, and I'm working with union officials. I think our coalition partners can support it. And importantly, I think Rebney can support it. Look, they're a loud voice in the governor's ear. Let's not fool ourselves.
And I also think what's elegant about it is it's not on the backs of the people of the city that are struggling the most right now. Look, I would say.
You and I, anyone, we go out, we buy toothpaste. There's a tax on that. We go out and we buy anything. There's a tax on that. Somebody goes to buy or sell a stock or a bond, there's no tax. There's no tax. So right. All we're asking for is equity in a sale. That's all we're asking for. We're not asking for, you're right, it's not going to be a burden on the backs. It's not a regressive tax. Anyone who is in the market would pay pennies on the dollar, and it would, added together, bring in that much money. In order to address a revenue problem. I mean, if you were nervous about it for any reason, you could even say, we're going to unwind the rebate as revenues start to come into the city and state, as they will do, as we are confident they will do over the coming months and years.
So making it a temporary solution.
Happy to do that. Much better than cutting food for our seniors, cutting food for all the schools where there are grab and go programs, cutting our hospitals, cutting our healthcare system, cutting out social workers in schools, cutting out arts programs in our schools, cutting back on teachers, guidance counselors, all these things that are on the table today. Why are we going down that path when there's such an obvious solution?
I think you really drove it home with when you said just when you buy toothpaste, you pay a tax. I wish the
Absolutely.
tax on my toothpaste was a penny to the dollar.
Well, that too.
Yeah.
It's even higher.
Yeah. So I want to
It's
thank you
even
so
higher. It's
much.
8 cents to the dollar.
Right.
That's right.
Helen Rosenthal, thank you so much for joining us.